Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Julia, and we're the folks behind abarabove.com, the ultimate resource for craft bartenders, bar operators, and just about anybody else looking to make great craft drinks.
I'm a bar consultant with more than 10 years of industry experience.
And I run abarabove.com, bringing weekly articles and cocktail recipes to help you make great drinks and grow your career behind the bar. This is episode number 112, and this week it's time to get back to our ever-growing list of listener questions. This week we have 3 great questions about 3 different things: working as a bartender before you turn 21, making your own single-ingredient bitters, and what temperature you should keep your mixers. Let's get to the questions. Our first question comes from Sarah from Washington State. She asks, I'm 19 and I want to start bartending, but the laws in my state say I have to be 21. What can I do now to set myself up for success in bartending when I turn 21 or if I move to a different state?
Yeah, there's a couple different pathways. I know different states have different laws about when you can legally start handling alcohol. It looks like you looked into yours already. But this is something you may consider if you really want to get behind the stick and start tending bar. Other states could be as low as like 18. So if this is something you really want to do, that could be one pathway for you to look at different states.
I think another great pathway would be to look at different roles. While handling alcohol tends to have its own restrictions, as you know, you may be able to have a different role in the restaurant, or maybe you're able to handle alcohol, you just can't serve it. For example, with a role like a bar back or a cocktail waitress. One thing to note, from what I've heard, speaking to a lot of people in the industry, bar backing is a very common pathway to bartending. So if you get into a bar backing role, nobody's going to be surprised if you say that you would like to take that to a full bartending role someday. It's not quite so common to go from cocktail waitress to bartender. So you may want to be a little bit more proactive if you find a cocktail waitress job, and make absolutely sure that your manager knows the path that you want to take so nobody will be surprised, and more importantly, so you won't be frustrated if you find yourself having difficulty moving out of that role after you turn 21.
Yeah, and bar backing is a really great way just to kind of start to understand the environment you're going to be working in, the spirits that you're going to be working with. It really is, I cannot recommend it highly enough. I didn't do that, as I mentioned before, but I really do think it's something that I would have become a better bartender.
You said several times that you wish you had.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a big gap in my knowledge, but I think it's a really great way, and it's a kind of a traditional pathway to
Plus,
bartending.
It's a great workout.
Yeah, oh my God, yeah. You're going to be running. You can go ahead and cancel your gym membership because you're not going to need it.
Which is good because you may not be able to afford it.
Right, and by the time you're 21, if you bar back for 2 years, you're going to be a rock star.
It's true.
Yeah, you're going to know exactly what you're doing behind the bar and all that stuff. So learn, if you do take on a bar backing position, as I always say, watch the top performers, see what they're doing, ask them questions. Like, this is a really great opportunity to learn the mechanics and the really small details that really start to add up to make you an amazing bartender.
And I think anywhere you go, obviously, once again, making sure that it is legal for you to do so. I think if you find the right restaurant or bar and you show up, you're proactive, you work hard, you get the job done, they're going to be thrilled to have you. And if they're not, you're not in the right place.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about Washington, but I know in the Bay Area here, there's a huge shortage of qualified bartenders or bartenders that are really excited to learn the business. It's something I continue to hear every day. So somebody that has the right attitude goes a long way. So definitely let them know what your end goal is.
And if all of that fails, if you're not allowed to do any of the above, that doesn't mean there's nothing you could do. There's still a lot you can do in sort of a home study role, for lack of a better word. First of all, I would say you can learn a heck of a lot about bartending technique without using booze.
Yeah, I mean, the physical skills alone is something you could practice at home.
Shaking, stirring, straining, it's all the same whether or not there's tequila in it.
Right. You know, you could use iced tea, free pouring, get an empty bottle of alcohol, or whatever, cooking oil, something that has a kind of the same handle, the hand grip, the spirit bottle, put a pour spout in there and just practice your pours over and over until you can do it blindfolded in both hands, like either hand. And I do mean it, like just get your counts down that solidly.
Yeah, I mean, if you get the physical skills down, that's going to be fantastic. But even beyond that, start making mocktails. You know, so much of the technique, or I should say the art of flavor combinations, of balance, of all that stuff, it still applies. There is I will say there's a little bit of extra intricacy that comes with the alcohol bit, but if you know the rest of it, you're going to be in really good shape.
Yeah, so to Julia's point, start to create those syrups, start to really figure out combinations of flavors, and start to develop like theoretical cocktails in your head and see if you can execute a non-alcoholic version of it. It's a great place to start. As
a final note, I would say if you're interested in bartending, you may already be interested in this, but I would just say start cooking. Again, this goes back to the flavor combinations thing. It'll teach you a lot about how food works. You probably already do this if you're interested in this line of work, but just one more thing to play with.
Yeah, and desserts in particular are a great way to figure out extractions, how to extract flavors into a liquid form. So concentrate on all food, but if you really want to kind of focus, desserts and syrups are a great way to just kind of hone in on particular skill sets for cooking.
And a really good way to make your roommates and family love you.
Just one more reason.
Hope this helps, Sarah.
So while we're on the subject of this, if any of our listeners know how to do this, calculations for safety, please let us know. Reach out to us directly, and we would love to share this information because I think it's one of those giant gaps in our industry that nobody's really has communicated out. So if you know how to do this information or how to come around these formulations safely, please let us know.
Or if you have great resources, and we would love to include those in the show notes, and we will add them to the show notes if we get any, which will be mixologytalk.com/112, I guess, 112.
I think so, yep.
The next question is from Spooky in Kansas City.
Love the name.
And I assume perhaps she, says, I've made a phase 1 of my tincture library and a batch of house bitters. He/she calls Maggot Cat Bitters of Distinction, which is a great name, which I found a recipe for and which turned out beautifully. But I'm wondering, what's the best way to make a single flavor like cardamom, coffee, vanilla bitters? Ratio bittering agents, whether to incorporate simple sugars, incantations. Thanks in advance.
Yeah, incantations are probably one of the most neglected techniques in our industry.
You just got to write them down because you got to get the cadence just right.
Right, and the moon has to be in the right phase. I mean, it's super important to get all that right. Toadstool and, a foot of toad are very different properties when you incorporate them into bitters.
You just got to make sure your cauldron is just the right temperature.
Yeah, it's true. So I appreciate you calling that out. Now, just a couple of things, just so we have the common language. When you talk about single flavor extractions, they're typically called tinctures. So unless they have a bittering component in them, then they're called tinctures. If they have a bittering component, they're called bitters. And bitters are typically compounds of multiple different ingredients with a bittering agent. And then tinctures are typically one extraction of a non-bitter flavor. That's kind of how I understand it.
Seems like that's the nomenclature you typically see in our industry. Whether or not it's officially scientifically correct, I don't know that we know that for sure, but this is definitely the way I've seen it referred to among our industry.
Yeah, so just so we have the right terminology down as we move forward. So if you're talking about single flavor tinctures, the way I've done them is just to infuse them in different strength alcohols, and then I'll taste them. I tend to go a little heavier on the extraction, and then I can always water it down. As long as there isn't a super intense tannic side to it, or if there's not a weird kind of taste that I want to not have in my final product, I'll typically go for a pretty heavy extraction and then just, like I said, just kind of calm it down with either some water or lower proof alcohol. So that's to do it. I know the tincture library that I have at home is all from 151. So it was Everclear that I used, and I just use a neutral grain spirit. But you can use other flavors or other alcohols as well. So if you want to do a rum extraction, you can use 151 or bourbon. You can have a really hot bourbon that you use. I know Willet has a pretty high ABV bourbon that you could use for stuff like that, but I'm sure there's quite a few other ones as well.
So if you're looking at making single ingredient bitters, I guess we're cheating a little bit and saying if the ingredient you're looking at, like vanilla, isn't inherently bitter, it may need to be a 2-ingredient bitters. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So then you could have a single extraction of a bittering agent, say like Cinchano or something else. And then you can start to mix them drop by drop in a bigger batch to kind of get your formulation correct. And then if you want to create a whole batch of bitters, you could do it that way. All right, now I have my master recipe. I'm going to scale it up I'm going to tinker with it a couple of times to make sure I have the final product right. And then I'm going to build that all off of kind of my tincture experiments. Does that make sense? I hope I explained it correctly.
It does make sense. I just have to mention one thing that's super important here. Something that we as an industry are starting to identify is the risks inherent in these kinds of extractions. I know there used to be, 100 years ago, this all used to be pharmaceutical type of stuff. And the only people that you would find doing this were pharmacists who were educated in this kind of stuff. But nowadays, we can all find cinchona in the back of our local Asian grocery. And there's some risk there. I think it's really important to note that it's not that hard to hurt yourself. It's not that hard to over-extract. It's not that hard to create a tincture. It'd be very dangerous. And so the thing I hate being a stick in the mud here, but it's so important. Be really careful. If you don't understand it, then research it before you start getting down, before you start playing with it. You could hurt yourself, and perhaps more frighteningly, you could hurt your guests or your family or your friends.
Yeah, and Julie brings up a really good point. This is something I feel extremely adamant about as well. The thing you have to realize about typically bittering agents is bitter is a side effect of kind of almost a poison or a toxic chemical.
Right, it's how the plant defends itself, right?
Right, exactly. So when you start to extract it and start to do high-proof extractions like this, you don't know what the quantity of that toxic element is in your bitters. So be extremely, extremely careful. And if you don't know what you're doing, you probably don't want to mess with it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. I mean, unfortunately, when you start looking at the sort of safe regulations for a lot of these things, you find really 25 parts per million is safe. But unfortunately, I don't know about you, but I don't have the tools to measure my tincture to know how many parts per million are in there. So again, I would just reiterate the care here. Again, you didn't even specifically mention using dangerous ingredients in your question, Spooky, but I have to assume that you probably have some, because typically if it's bitter, then I personally myself, if it's bitter, I consider it to be something to be really, really careful with.
Right. So just keep that in mind as you start to do these extractions and start to make your own bitters. Look for good resources where you can really kind of rely on their formulations. Even some of those older books, like Jerry Thomas's book and a couple other ones, they were using ingredients that are currently not safe to extract with.
Absolutely. Some of those books, you see versions that have come out recently. Some of them have been updated. I think there was one, I'm trying to remember correctly, I want to say there was one of these books that included a recipe for Angostura bitters that the recipe is no longer accurate because it was too dangerous. I'm going off memory, so don't quote me on that.
I know
but
you didn't, this wasn't kind of what your topic was, Spooky, but I think it goes hand in hand.
You gave us a soapbox to stand on.
Well,
Thanks for that.
not only that, but it is part of what we do. We create all these great new ingredients and all that stuff, but on the other side of that, we have to be very, very careful, because there are probably every year reports of people getting sick based off of these extractions. I know tobacco is a huge one.
Please,
don't even touch.
Don't use tobacco. It's a real bad idea.
Yeah, and I know I think Avery Glazier, I heard that he got sick on homemade quinine, homemade tonic water. And the stuff, when you get it, is pretty nasty. So, like I said, just be careful, know what you're doing. And if you don't, keep looking until you figure it out, or just don't use those elements.
I agree. So sorry to get all negative on you, but I mean, I do think there's definitely some stuff to play with. Just play carefully.
Yeah, like I know espressos can have a nice bitter aftertaste to them. So that could be like a really familiar thing that you could use. What else? Teas, like over-extracted teas, tend to have some nice bitter notes to it as well. So there's a couple of natural ingredients that you can probably take a look at for bittering agents as well.
Our last question is from Chuck from Baltimore, and he asks, what is your take on the temperature of your mixers? And by mixers, I mean soda, tonic, juices, etc. I'm currently employed as a bartender for a caterer, and many of the other bartenders I work with don't care whether the mixers are chilled or not, and are content to make every cocktail with room temperature mixers. I always claim this results in a watered-down drink that tastes like crap, but they just don't care. Good question.
Yeah, this is a really good question, Chuck, and I'll definitely agree with you on the non-carbonated, the lemon lime orange juice. You typically want those kept as cold or you want them cold because they tend to oxidize and just kind of taste off pretty quickly. So that's one element of it. The other side is the carbonated side. Now, I would experiment with this because for me, I actually noticed the opposite. So when I first helped open a restaurant, we had the little tiny glass bottles of soda, and I had them all chilled down and, ice cold and all that stuff. and then I would make like a gin and tonic or a rum and coke, and quite often I would get them sent back.
Why was that?
They said it tasted flat.
Maybe the temperature means the carbonation seems a little muted?
I think that's kind of what was happening. So I kind of changed up my philosophy, and I changed up how we served it. And I would do room temperature sodas. So the way I would build a cocktail, let's say it was a rum and coke, I would pour my shot of rum right into the glass. I would top off the glass halfway up with Coke, and then I would add my ice. So I'm trying to kind of sidestep the dilution by, I guess, kind of putting all the ingredients together first and then chilling down the whole mass together. Don't know if that's going to actually result in a less watered down cocktail, but it kind of preserved the carbonation from what I noticed. I mean, this was only one data point. This was only my own experience, but that's what I experienced. Not a lot of people sending back cocktails because the carbonation seemed flat.
Interesting. And I think one thing to note, of course, is, and you mentioned this, Chuck, you are working as a bartender for a caterer. So you are going to probably be dealing with canned mixers, packaged mixers, versus many bartenders who are going to have just, you're going to have a gun, right? Mm-hmm. So it's going to be chilled already. You're not going to have a choice whether to open a room temperature can of Coke or not.
Right, exactly. And also, one other thing to mention is I actually had room temperature and cold bottles of mixer as well. So if somebody ordered a Coke, I could just pull it out and use it from the fridge if you want.
So if somebody just ordered a Coke, not like a rum and Coke, which would you do?
I would pour it out of the cold because obviously there's a big difference in flavor and carbonation and all that stuff. So I would actually just give them the cold bottle.
Well, and that makes sense because it's not diluted with rum. It sounds weird to say that, but it's all Coke. So you're probably less at risk of somebody feeling like it's flat.
Right, exactly.
I think the key here is just to experiment.
Yeah, kind of do a taste test with them. Like, hey, here it is. And don't go in there with any kind of preconceived notions. Like, legitimately carry it out as an experiment. Like, all right, this is example A, example B.
What tastes better?
Yeah, exactly. You don't know which one's which on your own end.
Double blind,
yeah.
Hot.
So, and then you can try it. Like, all right, we have some assumptions here. Let's challenge these assumptions and figure out what's the best way to serve this stuff. And then you just make it part of your system. Like, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I will agree with you, Chuck, though. It seems very counterintuitive. It just makes sense if you have a room temperature mixer, it's going to cause more dilution. Right. But that's just not been Chris's experience. So I would just say test it.
Yeah, especially when it comes to the carbonation side. I mean, I think we're talking about two different things, dilution and carbonation. They never sent their cocktail back for being diluted, but they did send it back based off of carbonation.
Maybe Chris just had picky guests.
I definitely did. I definitely had some picky guests, and but I'm sure at the banquets that you serve and the catering events, they're probably gonna have some pretty picky guests too. So yeah, just try it. I mean, sit down with your beverage manager, sit down with your bartenders, and do a double blind on, all right, how are we gonna serve this stuff? Get on agreement. Everybody has buy-in at this point. And then you can turn that as part of your policy. Like, this is how we serve our drinks, if it's that important to you.
Right. I think that's the key. I hope that helps, Chuck. I know it's probably not the answer you're looking for, but do some experimentation and let us know, because I would love to know what you find out. Thanks again, Sarah, Spooky, and Chuck. We absolutely love these episodes. They're a lot of fun. So thanks again for sending in your questions. And if you, dear listener, have questions for us, do send them in. We would love to hear them. We love adding to our list and hopefully catching up with it. So do send them in. You can send it in on any show notes page, or you can just email them in directly using the email address cheers@mixologytalk.com. Catch you next time. Cheers.
Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.